So, Pete, take us a little back to when you started with Android. Were there any, you know, problems, things that frustrated you, that Android journey story? Were there
Yeah,
some things that, kind of, you were happy with, other things that didn't quite make you happy, or, things that you
yeah,
struggled with?
yeah. A few things actually, Warren, because I kind of got onto the Android platform as soon as it was available. So my first Android device was a really small phone. Now I've still got it. Looks so small compared to the modern phones, but it was an HTC Magic, and
The
I think,
magic.
yeah. Do you remember
Talking
that
about the
one?
magic, the word magic rings a magic somewhere. All right, keep going, Pete.
Yeah, and this was like towards like the autumn of 2009, and it was the first Android device available in the UK. Um, but a couple of months before that came out, I'd spent a lot of money buying a new Nokia phone, and it was one of the top end business Nokia phones with like it
Yeah,
kind of held it landscape, and the QWERTY keyboard slid out from underneath from behind, and it ran an operating system called Symbian.
that's right.
Um, yeah, and the reason I'd gone for that was because Warren, you were demonstrating earlier KNFB Reader. Well, that had just launched. That had just been published on Nokia Symbian,
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
this amazing new thing that you could take a photograph. You might have a bus timetable in your hand, or you may be in a restaurant and have a menu, and instead of like asking somebody else to read it, you could just take your phone out, have a KNFB reader, take a photograph of the menu, and just it would speak to you the menu. There was
And that
one
was
big problem:
very expensive. I think it was almost like
two
two
thousand
thousand
dollars.
dollars here
Yeah,
with the phone and the software on it, and it took a lot of moolah out of our pockets.
exactly. Yeah. So, in one way, it's accessible software, but in another way, it's not accessible because it's like $2,000.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm thinking, wow, I've just bought the phone. I can't afford the software as well. And then Android was launched in the UK. So I, my son was very lucky. He picked up this brand new shiny Nokia top end phone, and I bought an HTC Magic, and of course then apps were like 99 cents, or in the UK 99p or
Yeah.
69p, just so cheap or even free. So yeah, HTC Magic running Android 1.6. So I used that for a couple of years, and I think the big discovery for me at that point was Google Maps. Um, it just was like a life changer. Being able to get around, be independent. I remember that whenever I was going for like a job interview or some kind of like an important meeting, what I would do is a couple of days before I would do that journey. So I'd get the train or get the bus, and you have all your timetables there in your rucksack, and you work out the journey and all of that. I would go and do the journey a couple of days before, maybe the weekend before, do the whole journey, maybe 50, 60 miles, find find out where all the bus stops are, find the front door to like the business entrance to where I was going for the meeting, or if it was an interview, a job interview or something like that. So that when I needed to do the journey for real, like a few days later, I kind of was confident that I knew what I needed to do, how I'd find the building, where I'd find the bus stops and things like that. So when Google Maps was available on a mobile device, oh, that made a huge difference. And but actually, the early versions they they didn't have route planning for public transport, so there
No.
was there was still a manual process. It's kind of funny, isn't it? It's amazing to think how much it's developed, but
Yeah. And it keeps changing.
yeah, yeah,
So from the magic, which
yeah.
one did you go to?
Well,
Take us down that path.
I stayed with HTC, and they brought out it was a faster phone called the Wildfire.
I
Um,
love that wildfire, baby.
yeah, great, much faster, great phone, better display. That one didn't have a trackball because the HTC Magic, although it was touchscreen, it also had a little trackball at the bottom.
All the
So,
Android phones at that time used to have that. Yeah.
right. So I think by the time the Wildfire came out, they'd already lost that because, of course, these mobile phone manufacturers are always looking at ways of reducing costs, and the fewer buttons that are on there and the fewer ports, it saves them money, doesn't it? And So the trackball had gone with the wildfire, and it was round about when the wildfire came out. I discovered that you could load your own ROM, like cyanogen was the big thing then. So
Ah, there's the Mongolian River starting right there. Austin,
that's it.
Pete, you went for baptism then.
Yeah, and Austin gave a fantastic demonstration a couple of weeks back about loading a custom ROM, and did a really great job with that. And back in the day, then it was such a scary thing to do. And I think the wildfire was still under warranty when I decided to load a new ROM,
Ah,
which was crazy. And I remember after kind of putting the new ROM on there for the very first time and then switching the phone back on, that first boot, it takes like 5 minutes, and I thought, oh no, I've ruined the device, I've bricked my wonderful phone. But then after about 5 minutes, it then slowly started to come awake and everything started to work. So yeah, exciting times. So I used that for a couple more years, and then I was really tempted by Samsung. So the first Samsung phone I had was the S3, Samsung S3.
beautiful phone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And again, that was a big step forward from. When I go for a phone, I tend to use it for as long as I can, and so I tend to get about 3 years, something like that, before I
Well,
change.
it makes sense. That S3 came out, that was in 2012. Yeah.
Oh, was it right?
Yeah. And that was a great phone. One of the beautiful phones Samsung ever made, so it was a
Yeah,
life changer.
yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, you only get support for security updates for a couple of years, something like that, and then they move on. They stop supporting that model phone because they want you to upgrade. So again, I would then sort of start loading custom ROMs to make sure I'd get the latest version of Android and the latest security updates. So it does extend the life of a device. And round about then, I thought, I really want to have a go at developing an app for Android. So I started to learn about how you develop for Android, and then it was all about using a development platform called Eclipse,
Yeah.
and so it's Java based for Android, and I developed an app which last week you talked about Lazarillo and what a fantastic app that is.
Yeah, the GPS app. That's right.
Yeah, well, back in sort of like 2012, something like that, I'd sort of I developed my very own kind of very basic version, I have a guess, of what would be Lazarillo, but not anything like as sophisticated as Lazarillo. But
Hmm.
it was just a really simple app to navigate you to get from one point to another, and it's kind of spoke. So it was using GPS, and it spoke directions. I was just using like the clock face at the time. So if you needed to go straight ahead, I would say, go at 12 o'clock, go straight ahead. Or if a person needed to turn right, I would say the now point to 3 o'clock, turn right. So you knew you needed to turn around to the right, or 9 o'clock to turn left. And then I added an API, Google Maps API, which um, which was free then, for limited use, and it would kind of
Yeah.
tell you what things were nearby where you were, if there were bus stops nearby or ATMs. So I got in touch with the BBC and mentioned about this app, because back then there weren't many apps that would do this, and it was I just published it on Google Play Store for free, and a radio presenter here in the UK, blind radio presenter Peter White, he picked it up, he got involved and was interested. So he sent a reporter over, a guy called Manny Jasmi, then he was a BBC reporter and a blind reporter. Manny came out to meet me, and it was a cold winter's day. So he said, it was great. We had a really nice chat. He's a lovely guy, and he said, "Okay, Pete, let's try the app." So I got my phone out, and I think it had been switched off at this point. I was saving the battery, and I
Yeah.
switched it on. Oh no! And Manny had his recording equipment going, and it was a disaster because for some reason my phone couldn't get a GPS lock. And I don't know if you remember back in the sort of early
Oh,
days of
yeah.
GPS,
Yeah.
sometimes it would take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour or so to get a GPS lock. So the recording equipment was recording, and Manny's asking me about this app. And it was a complete disaster because it just it wasn't working. There was no GPS. for some reason. So it was, and it was all recorded. So then the
Oh
next
my.
day when the radio program went out, that was the demonstration of my app.
Well,
So
I'll
that,
be.
yeah, that wasn't too successful, but there we go. Things always seem to go wrong, don't they? But
I noticed that happening a lot of times, trying to demonstrate something. I mean, even on our podcast, sometimes I'm trying to demonstrate a particular app or whatever the case may be. And I just realized it's not behaving like it was earlier. I mean, it's
oh
just
yeah,
terrible.
it's almost like the technology knows, like when it's the most important time, that's when it decides not to work. So
Yeah,
it happens all the time. Yeah.
It is the curse of the demonstration monster.
exactamundo, my point.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So from Samsung at the S3,
Mm.
where did you migrate to?
So I kept hold of that. Skipped a model, went to the S5, and that was another great phone. I was really happy with that. And
And I
then
want to
on,
plug in here, Pete, that the S5 was the very first phone, at least for those of us who are blind, that the camera has a face detection recognition, and kudos to Samsung for doing that. That was the very first time, or else on Android, as blind people, we didn't have a feature that says, hey, there's a face in the camera view or anything like that until that Galaxy S5. So for those of you who hate Samsung, just remember that they are the pioneers that made this possible for us on Android, where now we have camera apps that now tell us how many faces are there in the camera view. So kudos to Samsung for opening that door.
yeah, good point. And it was a great phone, wasn't it? And used that for many years. Switched over to OnePlus 6 and used that for a few years. And Warren, guys, I've got to tell you, last year I kind of did the thing that we shouldn't do. I switched from
What
Android.
did you do?
I switched over to iPhone
Oh,
because
bro, I'm going to take your supper tonight.
I know I'm so embarrassed. Well, here's the thing, but it was a temporary switch. So I was listening to podcasts for visually impaired people who like technology, like geeky podcasts and things. And all the time, everybody talks about iPhones are so good and
Yeah,
iPhones are so accessible. And, they are, Apple, they've done so much for the visually impaired community. So I bought an iPhone SE 2020, which came out in March last year. It
that's
was
right.
kind of like, a lower, it was still a lot of money, like $500-600 or pounds for me. So still a lot of money, but kind of cheap for an iPhone. And I mentioned that I use magnification rather than voice. So in Android, I always set my font size to be the largest and I set the display size to be the largest. I think that's kind of like the dots per inch setting, isn't it? So everything
Yeah,
gets bigger. So that was it. I got my new iPhone and I went straight, when I switched it on, that was the first thing I did was change the font size to the largest. And I can't remember what they call display size in iOS, but there's like a similar thing. And then started downloading my apps. And I was just so disappointed because the Apple apps respect the font size setting in system settings, but the third-party apps, which is like most of my apps are third-party apps, so few of them on iOS kind of respect the font size setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I selected largest fonts, but then when the apps start up, they would just either they didn't display large fonts, or maybe they did, but the developers hadn't tested the layout of the screen with large fonts, and just fields would overlap each other, and and screens were kind of messy. So then I went back into system settings and reduced the font size and things like that. Um, and I thought, look, I've made the change. I didn't have an Android phone anymore. I'm going for iOS. You knew it was going to be different, so don't be afraid of it. Invest the time, learn all the shortcuts. So I did all of that, carried on for 6 months, but after 6 months, I found that I was using a handheld magnifying glass whenever I wanted to use my phone. And it was like going back
Uh,
10, 20 years. So
yeah.
like in one pocket, I have my phone, and in the other pocket, I had a magnifying glass, like a times five. Or
Carrying two gadgets just to make it work, some of the things that we used to do. Yeah, I hear you.
yeah. And And it's not a good user experience when you're having to use a magnifying glass with your phone. And you're using both hands then, and then it gets tricky to type on the keypad and things like that. So around about November last year, I saw OnePlus launch their new, they bring out like the T version of the model, don't they, in the autumn. So I switched. I bought a OnePlus 8T, which is my current phone, and I system reset the iPhone, sold it on eBay, and that's it. I've just been so happy moving back to Android. I like the configurability. I like all of the openness. You can get a USB lead, plug it into a computer, drag and drop your files. You can buy cheap earbuds that, they support like aptX codec, which is like really high fidelity sound quality and low latency. And that kind of thing's not available on Apple. They kind of lock down the codecs. So for like $70, you can buy really good quality earbuds that support super fast codecs. And I've just been so glad to move back to Android. So this is my Android journey. I'm just like from the beginning, and I have dabbled with iOS and a lot of respect for iOS, but it's not for me. As a low vision user, Android all the way. It's so much more accessible.
That's a beautiful story, Pete. We all have been down that road, and I remember my early days with iOS. I actually started with them, and how I was even still not very good at it at the time, and I utilized Apple Vis, for a while to get me going, and then when I got into Android, of course, I had rough start getting going and things like that. So your story is familiar sounding to just about all of the other stories that we've heard. And then, as late as last year, you went back to it. And
Yeah.
and then here you're back again with Android. So that's a beautiful story. One cannot say, hey, you've never tried it or anything like that. So it's always good to be able to have that experience and then realize which one it is that you are most productive with, to use the term that people like to use all the time, or
Yeah.
this is more productive on this, I'm not productive on that. But at least you've been there on both sides of the aisle, and now you know what it is and what meets your need the most. And I think that's what it all comes down to. It's what meets our needs that matters the most.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong, is there? It's what works for you, and we're just so lucky now to be living in an age where there is so much accessible technology, and moving on from like the navigation apps like Lazarillo and Google Maps to KNFB Reader, where it'll photograph a book and read the book, and we can download books from Bookshare and all of that. It's the devices that are available to us now really do make us much more independent. It's great.
Now, Pete, I want to mention something here. So my comment has to do with the app that you wrote, the navigational app that you wrote that, the guy came to film you or, do an interview with you, and the app bumped out, or, the phone bumped out, I should say. And so, Pete, it would have been nice to see that thing, continue, because I know there was another guy from the UK. I think his name Les. I just used to call him Les, and he had the Now Nav app. You guys remember that, Austin? Yeah, so he had the
No, I've
Now
not heard
Nav
of it.
app, and it was free, and then he made it for like $30 or something, and I guess something happened. I think back in either 2017 or 2018 that Google, you are talking about those Google Map APIs. They became very expensive, or have become very expensive, and that has actually kind of killed a lot of otherwise good apps like the one that you are talking about. And I think that's what killed Les's Now Nav app.
Yeah, that's the thing with APIs, that when they were launched and they became available, very often they were free. So you could write an app that could use the data from an API like Google Maps API, or even like public transport systems would publish like bus times and train times and things like that. So you could link to them. And then they started to, obviously they realized that more and more people were hitting their servers with these APIs, and they needed to invest in their server infrastructure and all of that.
Yeah.
So then they start to charge for the APIs. So it's difficult to make software for free. And then as the developer, you're kind of at risk of running up a big bill with Google or with Microsoft.
Yeah.
So
I'm kind of wondering though, as something like OpenStreetMap, maybe I know that database, a lot of other GPS makers, have turned to of late because, that is free. And, maybe Pete, since you're now back in school, maybe it's something you can look back into, give that thing a resurrection, give it life and see, we'll be proud to, see something come from you, one of our own,
Warren, that
giving us
sounds good,
something to use.
actually. Yeah. I'm going to look into it.
This time it's not going to mess you up when Manny comes back to interview you.
Let's hope it would work. I still wake up in the middle of the night and I remember that. But these things happen. Character building. So
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it could be time for a new app. Yeah.
That sounds good. Dennis, any questions for Pete?
I want to thank you, Pete, for coming. It was great having experience from a low vision user. If you run into any questions or problems when you start using TalkBack, certainly subscribe to our list and ask there. Hopefully everything you will need will be accessible via TalkBack, and if not, hopefully it will become accessible.
Great, thanks, Dennis. And I really enjoy the podcast, Blind Android Users podcast, and I'm learning every time there's a new episode, like even the one that came out a couple of days ago about Android 12. I'm learning so much, and it's just nice to have like a resource that's specific to like Android users who are visually impaired. So
it's been a great time with our friend Pete, and this goes out to every member of our list. If you want to come on live and just have a chat during our podcast, I think that's a wonderful time for people to get to know who you are, besides just telling them about, your Android journey story, whether you send it by recording. But I think it becomes very special when you come on live. And so, like I said, we wouldn't mind, people coming on and just having a chat with us during this podcast.
Anytime. Yeah. And it's a privilege to be here. And you guys, I really appreciate your work, everything you're doing here. And if I can get involved sometimes or whatever, absolutely. That would be great.